I'm your huckleberry.
Mrs. Anders, what does your husband do for a living?
He gets a job in hayfields.
In hayfields?
Yes.
How much does he make when he's working?
From $3 to $4 a day.
$3 to $4 a day?
Yes.
And he hasn't worked now in 3 or 4 weeks?
Yes.
Do you get food stamps?
No, because I'm not able to get them.
Why?
I ain't got them this month. They cost $70 and I don't have it.
Have you asked for any help from anyone in raising the money to buy those stamps?
No, say there ain't no need.
Why?
They ain't gonna give it to you.
Have you been down to the welfare department and talked to them, or has your husband?
No, so the latest time I went to the welfare, the lady told me, said if you have a living husband, that they couldn't give you no help.
Even if he's not working?
Yes.
3 weeks after talking to Dr. Wheeler, Mrs. Anders gave birth to a severely malnourished baby. 2 days later, the baby died.
And partly because of the general rule that welfare is cut off if there is a man in the house, fathers are often driven away so that mother and children can eat.
85% of the head of household is a woman, because most of the men who should be in the household, they cannot make a decent living. And of course it is better to know that a child will be fed 12 months out of the year than 3 months, which during the summer when construction work you can make a decent living.
The man in the house rule was written to prevent welfare cheating, to make sure that aid to families with dependent children would go only to families headed by mothers. But the effect of the man in the house rule is to create for children an atmosphere of investigation and surveillance. And thus, the welfare system in its operation turns out to be a system to make life harder for children.
The welfare system helps the disintegration of the American family. It offers money to families if the fathers will leave them and stay away, in that sense undoing the very stability of the family and taking away one of the two parents that children, of course, need. And what I have seen, I'm afraid to say, all over the country is that the legal system works against the best kind of home for these children. We don't encourage parents to be at home with the children. We don't encourage mothers to feel that they can find their destiny as mothers. We take away, in many of the most vulnerable homes, fathers from those homes. We herd foster children together in institutions rather than trying to find decent homes for them. We don't tap the resources we have in communities and with respect to older people so that they can help out vulnerable homes. We don't sanction and encourage and support in every way, morally, psychologically, and financially, the dignity and integrity of the home. And in the worst of it is that the homes that are most vulnerable are the homes that are least supported by the policies of local, state, and federal governments. And no wonder then, out of these more vulnerable neighborhoods, we get an endless cycle of troubled, delinquent, wayward youth who grow up even more and become the lawbreakers of our society. Now, I don't know how you break this cycle except by starting out with young children.
On that ground, we are concerned about eliminating the inhuman, the dehumanizing aspects of the welfare system, and I could go into a lot of them, even the one where in some states the government is an encourager of desertion, so to speak, because they say in substance that one can't be on welfare if there isn't a man in the house. I mean, if there is a man in the house, and often out of humane humanitarian concern. Fathers have left home in order for their children to get meat and bread. There are so many dehumanizing elements in the welfare system that we are concerned about removing. Ultimately, we are concerned about a guaranteed annual income. And the other thing I think it is very necessary to say is that everybody's on welfare in this country. And when it comes to black people and poor people, we just call it something else. When it's for white people and rich, we call it subsidies. And what we have in this country is socialism for the rich and capitalism. And I think.
Raise your hand if you're married. None of you are married. Raise your hand if you would like to be married to your baby's father. One. The rest of you who don't plan to get married, why don't you plan to get married? I'd like to know that.
You already have your child to think about, and then a whole family to care for. You know, it's a lot of responsibility, and then you don't want the commitments.
I wouldn't want no man holding me down because I think I can make it as a single parent.
But don't you think you might need help in raising that baby from a man?
Not really. I didn't have a father. My father wasn't in the home, so, you know, it really, male figures are not substantially important in the family.
25 years ago, you would not have heard such things said so freely because they were not embraced so widely. The strong family was still the backbone of black America, and 3 out of 4 children had both parents at home. That is true no longer. Most black children are now growing up without their fathers. The result is a world turned upside down as children copy what they see and repeat what they learn. LaDawn said she didn't have a father in her home and doesn't think her children need one. She's not unusual. Half the black families today are headed only by a woman. Clorinda said she could make it on her own as a single parent. She has never been married and is raising her daughter without a man's help. She's not unusual. Today, nearly 60% of all black children are born out of wedlock. Timothy said his children are not his responsibility. He has left them to be supported by their mothers and welfare. He's not unusual either. For LaDawn and Clorinda and Timothy, and many more like them in cities all over America, the traditional family no longer exists. It has vanished, and something new is taking its place. Single women and the children they're rearing alone are the fastest growing part of the black population. What becomes of the black family in a world where the values are being turned upside down?
If the parent is 17 and 18, uneducated, unmotivated, fooling around, wandering around, what's the child going to learn? Who's to teach him? When you learn something, you was taught by your parents. It was reinforced by school and your neighbors, but it was taught by your parents. Well, if the parents don't know anything, how are they going to teach the children? So it's not racism that I'm fighting right now. It's the lack of motivation. You see, I'm not even talking about racism. Maybe later on we'll get back to that. But I think we are destroying ourselves.
Not only the increase in the out-of-wedlock birth rate, but also the related changes in family structure, sexual practice, and such as the sharp decline in the number of children put up for adoption. The peak year for adoptions in the United States was 1970, the year of the technology shock. Over the next 5 years, the number of agency adoption was halved from 86,000 to 43,000. In 1969, mothers of out-of-wedlock children who had not married after 3 years kept only 28% of those children. In 1984, the rate was 56%. By the late 1980s, it was 66%. Unlike the other statistics we have mentioned, the shotgun marriage rate itself underwent only gradual change following the early 1970s. Why did it not change as dramatically as the others? For 2 reasons. The first is that the shotgun marriage, it was an accepted social convention, and as such, it changed slowly. Culture changes very slowly. The physical environment, technology changes very fast. I keep telling you guys that. It took time for men to recognize that they did not have to promise marriage in the event of a pregnancy in exchange for sexual relations. It may also have taken time for women to perceive the increased willingness of it may also have taken time for women to perceive the increased willingness of men to leave them if they demanded marriage. As new expectations formed, social norms readjusted, and the shotgun marriage rate began its long decline. In addition, the decreasing stigma of out-of-wedlock childbirth reinforced the technology-driven causes for the decline in shotgun marriage and increased retention of out-of-wedlock children. The physical culture changes what? The inherited culture from people to person. The physical environment changes, it changes the culture. With premarital sex, the rule rather than the expectation, and out-of-wedlock childbirth gradually ceased to be a sign that society sexual taboos had been violated. The reduction in stigma also helps explain why women who would have once put their baby up for adoption chose to keep it instead. One more puzzle requires explanation. The black shotgun marriage ratio began to fall earlier than the white ratio and shows no significant change in trend right around 1970. In other words, we were 20 years ahead. How do we account for the apparent anomaly? Here, federal welfare benefits may play a role. Okay, so it's not just right or left, it's both. Here, welfare benefits may play a role. For women whose earnings are so low that they are potentially eligible for welfare, an increase in welfare benefits has the same effect as out-of-wedlock births as the decline in the stigma to bearing a child out of wedlock. So black women, it was more of a financial choice. In other words, when it comes down to practicality, black women will live with the stigma if it means dollars, right? The difference in welfare eligibility between whites and blacks and the patterns of change in benefits rising in 1960s and falling thereafter may explain why the decline in the black shotgun marriage ratio began earlier than that for whites. Because blacks on average have lower incomes than whites, they are more affected by the change. Okay, because blacks on average have lower incomes than whites, they are more affected by the change in welfare benefits. As a result, the rise in welfare benefits in the 1960s may have had only a small impact. As a result, look at this. As a result, the rise in welfare benefits in the 1960s may have only a small impact on white shotgun rate, but they resulted in a significant decrease in black shotgun marriage rate. In other words, because of the money and the money that the child actually brought to low-income black women, they were willing to put up with this shame. Interesting. They know all this. Policy considerations. Although doubt will always remain about the ultimate cause for something as diffuse as a change in social custom, the technology shock theory does state the facts. The new reproductive technology was adopted quickly and on a massive scale. It is therefore plausible that it could have accounted for a comparably large change in marital and fertility patterns. The timing of the changes also seem, at least crudely, to the theory. I say crudely to match the theory. From a policy perspective, attempts to turn the technology clock back by denying women access to abortion and contraceptions is probably not possible. So in other words, they've basically given up. You can't unring the bell, can't put the worms back in the can. Even if it were, it would almost surely be counterproductive. In addition to probably reducing the well-being of women who use the technology, such a measure could lead to yet greater poverty. With sexual abstinence rare and the stigma of out-of-wedlock motherhood small, denying women access to abortion and contraception will probably increase the number of children born out of wedlock and reared and impoverished. In other words, if you try to undo it, you're going to get a explosion of impoverished out-of-wedlock births and impoverished single-parent families. On the contrary, efforts should be made to ensure that women can use the new technologies if they choose to do so. Finally, if the technology shock theory does explain the rise in single motherhood, cuts in welfare currently proposed would only further immiserize the victims. Such cuts would have little in other words, here we go, and it has been proven. Such cuts would have little impact on the number of children born out of wedlock, while impoverishing those already on welfare yet further. Instead, policy measures should make fathers pay to support out of wedlock children. This is where it came from. In other words, you can't do anything with the women in their opinion. They figure they can't do anything with the women. Instead, policy measures to make fathers pay to support their out-of-wedlock children would not only directly contribute to the well-being of children, but also tax men, look at this, but also tax men for fathering such children, thereby setting at least partially the change in terms between father and mothers. Such measures deserve serious policy consideration. In other words, instead of the society or the families using the shotgun to either to make men be responsible for the children or to cut down on the number of out-of-wedlock births, basically the federal government would pick up the shotgun and put it to men's heads. And this is in 1996, where you had this huge increase, big decrease in welfare, the huge increase in child support. In other words, we can't deal with the women. So what we're going to do is we're going to penalize the men for out-of-wedlock birth rates. This is staggering. Staggering. There's no accident why child support went up. It's no accident why they send fathers to jail. It's not about supporting the children. It's only partially about supporting the children. What they're trying to do is put the penalties on child support and out-of-wedlock birth so high that fewer men will engage in the practice of what? Sex outside of marriage. So basically, you take all the penalties away from the women, because you can't do anything with them, because the women are going to continue to do what they're going to do anyway. So instead of working with the women, you're going to jump on the guys, which hasn't worked very well anyway, because the rate is still high. Even though the number of children, I think the fertility rate went down, because the fertility rate has crashed down, especially for black men, because the penalties are so high for having children out of wedlock. But it pushed the fertility rate down, and also pushed the abortion rate down. Is because those two things, because the penalties are so high for black men, that they started, like I said, black men started wearing more condoms, stopped having as much sex willy-nilly. And if it wasn't for Pookie and Ray Ray, it probably would have crashed even further. That's just my opinion. But with that, folks, I had to read this. I had to get this out. I hope you enjoyed this, man. This is a smoking gun. This is not some willy-nilly document printed up by some dude somewhere that happens to have a blog and opinion. This is by Janet Yellen and somebody and another official from the Brookings Institute, and actually fostered by a number of leading policy Washington D.C. policy analysts. It's not no bullshit document. But I had to share that with you, man. I found this, man. I almost fell out of my chair. But with that, folks, I'm going to get out of here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one.